So, before we dive into other subjects, I sense that you probably saw what we talked about with Bishop Buddy, but in general, um, what the new sort of old normal is that we need to get used to, and how to navigate that. How to hear something that is being said from a place of salvation to a president who is hearing it only in political tones, and that's where we are now. We can't deny it or fight it, just sort of how to navigate that.
There is no navigation. You have Donald Trump. There is no smooth sailing with the President Trump. He is a disruptor. That is his goal. He has made clear that he is a vindictive President Trump. And I reread last night The Imperial Presidency by Arthur Schlesinger Jr., which is a recounting of how presidents can abuse their authority. Of course, the last part of the book deals with my old boss, Richard Nixon. But it is clear to me that what we face now is an imperial presidency. Donald Trump is issuing executive orders in record numbers. He is making declarations and statements. I spoke on Inauguration Day with Kim and our audience about the fact that there's never been an inaugural address like the one delivered by Donald Trump. So what you have to take into account is that for the next 4 years, we are going to have a constantly turbulent encounter with the American presidency. And the other thing we have to recognize, in my judgment, is that there are two schools of thought in the United States. One school of thought supports Donald Trump, and no matter what he says or what he does, they are going to back him. And the other school of thought, frankly, reflected in large measure by what you and Kim have talked about and what Mark talks about and what I talk about, is that we find Donald Trump's approach to America antithetical to ours. But we're going to have to live with it for 4 years, and it's going to be, I think, a turbulent 4 years. We haven't even mentioned the Panama Canal or Canada or the Gulf of America. We haven't talked about Ukraine yet. We haven't talked about the Middle East. There are so many dimensions here, and we haven't talked about the fact that Donald Trump and Melania Trump are now doing Bitcoin, and he made a fortune on Inauguration Day with what he put out. I mean, every norm that I am familiar with as a so-called scholar of the American presidency has been violated, which means that I now have the task of adjusting, of trying to make clear to people my concerns. I want to be clear. My political hero was a man named Wendell Willkie, and he was defeated for president by Franklin Roosevelt on Armistice Day 1940. He delivered a speech called The Loyal Opposition. What we need now is a loyal opposition, and I would go further and say a constructive opposition. Where Donald Trump does something right, we have to be supportive. I had a discussion this morning with someone about going into churches and schools, what ICE is going to be doing. May I tell you that it is not just churches and schools. We in San Francisco and those in Los Angeles, because we're primarily a West Coast-based area, but we know it on the East Coast too, where you have sanctuary cities. Donald Trump is threatening to cut all aid and support for sanctuary cities. And may I quickly, just because I'm using a scattergun approach, there's so many different things. Global warming doesn't exist in the Trump universe. Tell that to our friends in Los Angeles. Tell that to our friends in Washington, D.C. Tell that to our friends in Europe. And by the way, cutting off the World Health Organization. Unbelievable.
Yeah, these are things. Yeah, we visited yesterday some of these things you're talking about. I'm glad you're.
I'm sorry. Unfortunately, yesterday I was unable to tune in.
No. Of course. I'm just saying that I'm glad you're bringing them up, because I don't think stopping talking about them is constructive. If just one more person hears about it, it's that much better. And I think it's I think that you're right. And when you said we haven't talked about it, you're not talking about the Mark Thompsons. You're talking about the body politic and
in general.
People. Yeah, in general. And that's, that's true.
And people don't understand the implications. That's the thing. These are profoundly important moves. And that's why I go back to the Imperial Presidency. I urge people to read Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s book, The Imperial Presidency.
So here's what I have to interrupt you for a second. I read that book. I read it years ago, and it was recommended to me by another probably a colleague of yours who worked in the Nixon administration. I read it. I love the book. It was a big book. And then I heard you say you reread it last night.
Yes.
I hope you read passages of it and not it in its entirety. Otherwise, I
No,
feel
I
like
read the whole thing. I'm a very quick reader.
how long is that book? Like over 500 pages? That's I
yeah,
remember
it's about 450 pages.
Wow. And you watched hockey too. That's amazing. All right. Okay. Go ahead.
No, you watch hockey.
That's right. That's right. I forgot. Yeah. I got, I got mixed up.
But forget the book. Just think about what it says. An imperial presidency. Congress is not being consulted. Congress is not being able to pass laws.
Right.
Donald Trump is simply signing. This is what we see, if I may be so bold as to say, in countries that are not democracies. It concerns me greatly. I would rather see the tangle of discussions with members of the Senate and the House, and we're not seeing that. In fact, I listened to Speaker Johnson, and there's no criticism of Donald Trump. There's no criticism of any action. The Republican Party, as I once knew it, no longer exists.
Right. And Mike Johnson is a speaker unlike any I can think of right now, who and I'll let you tell me that I'm wrong, but who is really a puppet of the president. The speaker is usually the bulldog who goes up against the president, even the president of his own party, right? I mean, Tip O'Neill going to Jimmy Carter. I remember that. I remember
Tip O'Neill going after Ronald Reagan.
Well, I'm
Whether it
talking
was
about
your own party or not, it was the idea that Congress is an independent body. It doesn't take orders from a president.
Right. And Mike Johnson does.
Yeah. I reread Kings of the Hill by Dick Cheney and his wife, Lynn, which is a brilliant book about Congress and the leadership of Congress. This is a complete abdication of what our founders talked about as a balance of power and a check on the power. And it says here, Trump plans to seize the power of the purse from Congress. He's going to try everything he can. But let me tell you, that's not the first president to do that. Richard Nixon did the same thing. Harry Truman, in a way, did the same thing. You remember Harry Truman went after the steel industry, and he was overturned in the Supreme Court. A great case. Will this Supreme Court be an independent court? That's another question. But what I think we have to understand, and what bothers me is, if there are mass roundups, if there are pardons issued for people who have really committed crimes, if we have a president acting unilaterally without any consultation, I'm fearful for our future. Now, I had to explain to my children, who are now old enough to really grasp everything, they're in their 20s and 30s, that we have protections. That's what the whole idea was with an equally powerful Congress and judiciary. If that's gutted, then we really do have one-man rule. And this country cannot, must not ever bend a knee to one-person rule. And I would say that about a Democrat or a Republican. It doesn't matter to me. I want the vigor of debate. I want the vigor of dissent.
Right.
And the actions that Donald Trump has taken in the last 72 hours are revolutionary. I drew another analogy, if I may quickly. The Reagan Revolution in 1981 was a revolution in its own sense, but it is nothing comparable to what Donald Trump has done. Historians are going to write about these days, and I think weeks, with real concern about the balance of powers in the American system.
Right. And the problem with historians writing about that is the people who know it, and I'm talking about contemporary historians, the people who know it and feel like they can't do anything about it. The people who don't realize it support it blindly anyway. And that's a place that we haven't been. And I look back to you were far more intimate to the goings on in the Nixon years, obviously, than I. But at that time, there was still this notion that nobody was above the law, and what was going on was abhorrent to people who respect the presidency and the balance of power and the three branches of government, et cetera. And now you have an electorate that doesn't respect that. And that's what has me frightened. Does that resonate? Am I wrong about that?
No, if you go back and you listen to the David Frost interviews, you will find one clip, not more than a couple of minutes, if that, of Richard Nixon saying when a president does it, it's legal, saying that a president was above the law. I rejected that then, and I reject it now. There is no individual who can be above the law. Otherwise, Michael, we might as well go out and commit crimes because nobody's going to punish us, because we're going to be pardoned, because we're going to be let off. You opened with the so-called shaman.
Yeah.
And now he's going out to buy guns. I mean,
Right.
there is, and look, the head of the Oath Keepers is out of jail. And I listened this morning to his ex-wife describing her real fear and trepidation. Maybe it's too soon for the panic to set in, but the arrogance of power in this administration will certainly, I think, cause tremendous reaction in this country.
Yeah, one would hope. It didn't. The man was reelected, and there wasn't anything that wasn't known. And so I think the onus then goes on the other side. We had yesterday Pam Horowitz on the show, and Pam is the widow of Julian Bond. And Julian would have said, she said, he always said, don't agonize, organize. And the other side really has to organize better than they were able to do for a variety of reasons. Blame can be put anywhere, but blaming doesn't solve the problem anymore, unfortunately.
For those who are too young to remember, Julian Bond was a truly great American, a genuine hero. And, we don't have people like that. I just finished reading a biography of John Lewis. People like that, people of Barbara Jordan of Texas. I'm now citing African Americans. I can hear in my head Barbara Jordan's speech.
Her voice was talking like that. She had a great voice.
Yeah. By the way, she keynoted 4 Democratic national conventions, record-setting. But look, what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is that I go to bed at night, but I flip on the news at 2, 3, 4 in the morning to hear what it is that Donald Trump has done. We are going to be on the edge of our seats. And let me make one other comment. I know you have other questions, but I just want to say to you, I miss talk radio. I miss profoundly the fact that we were able 5 days a week, and in some cases I worked 6 days a week, to be able to interact with people who were pro-Trump, anti-Trump. But do you understand there's no forum now? And my son said something to me this morning. We listen to the news. We listen to Fox. We listen to CNN, MSNBC. These are not real news programs. These are opinion programs. The days when we had a Walter Cronkite, a Chet Huntley, a David Brinkley, Frank Reynolds, those days are gone. And that also disturbs me because we need to have the ability to hear straight news and then be able to debate it. And we've lost that. Anyway, how do we regain it?
We've also evolved into things like this, which I think some people prefer, and some people who came up through talk radio probably prefer talk radio. But
I prefer debate. I just prefer good old-fashioned debate, taking both sides of an issue. I've defended Donald Trump, and I've opposed Donald Trump with equal conviction.
Yeah, understood.
I had a speech coach, Michael, who used to say, I'd come in at 6:30 in the morning, and he would give me a topic, and I'd talk about it. And then he'd clap his hands, and he'd say, flip sides. So I learned to argue both sides of every question, and that's what we're missing. This limited vision is really terrible.
It is, and it's a way. Sometimes we're nostalgic for a way we never were, but we really were that way, and it doesn't seem like we're on the cusp of getting it back. And we don't. I don't know who it was, but very recently I heard someone talking about this. It may have been President Biden, but I don't think so. Just how there aren't editors anymore. There aren't people there aren't assignment teams that go through the balance of what makes an important news story. They go for the low-hanging fruit so much of the time. And reporter friends, including myself, I've worked at news organizations where my scripts don't get vetted. That's horrendous, right? I mean, I make mistakes. I could be loose with a fact or be putting in an old fact. And when I worked at places where my scripts would get vetted and fact checked, it was so much better. It made not just my work better, but it made the whole organization and the whole idea of journalism better. But again, I think that everything is so immediate now that I can't see we going back to it. Parmenia said my dad always used to watch Washington Week on PBS. By the way, it's still on, and you can watch it, and it's still a good show. And it's a good way to get your news and to get to see what's happening. It isn't sexy. It isn't, fun. It isn't like the repartee is on a really low level in terms of joviality, but you don't have to have that. It doesn't have to be sexy to be factual and interesting, I think.
I'm glad, by the way, that you mentioned, and I'm sorry I didn't hear you yesterday about the international situation. But people need to understand a president of the United States has many functions. One of the functions is he is the chief foreign policy designer of this country. And what Donald Trump says is going to affect us all. President took us out of the World Health Organization, took us out of the Paris Climate Accords. The president has made aggressive statements about Panama and about Canada. And all of these things, the problem, Michael, is it's too much. We could come on here and talk for hours about what has happened, but how do you narrow it down? How do you focus on what really matters? And part of the problem is in these opening days of the Trump administration, he is taking so many actions that I believed he would do it. We talked here on the Mark Thompson program about his commitment to the 2025 project. And take a look. That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, no question.
But you know what? We have to keep talking about it. We have to keep urging people. And by the way, when Donald Trump does something right, we have to applaud him. When he does something wrong, we have to be critical of him. And it was not unusual what the bishop did yesterday. There have been other presidents who have sat in church services and been criticized. Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon come to mind during the Vietnam War.
What was at the Riverside Church, William Sloane Coffin? He would do it all the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
And may I say, Forrest Church, Frank Church's son, was brilliant in his articulation. So this is not unusual, but we do live in a time of tremendous tensions. And one of the reasons I support the Mark Thompson program, one of the reasons I am here with you, is because this is a forum that needs to be aggressively pursued. People need to contribute. And I don't get paid for anything here at Mark Thompson. I volunteer my time. But we need to have these kind of forums, and I hope people support the Mark Thompson program.
Well, thank you for that. I do too, and I'm glad you mentioned that. A couple of John Watson says I watch Washington Week on YouTube every Friday night. It's there. You can find it for sure. And Nancy Wright says, in fact, Biden did say something about the media, so that's maybe where I heard it. We should also say a bit of news is that there was a shooting at a high school in Nashville today.
Yes, and the shooter is dead.
The shooter is dead, and one other student dead. Dehagwal, I don't know where the emphasis is, who's in the chat says, my granddaughter is at Antioch High School in Nashville. Thank goodness she's safe. 2 dead, 2 injured. I'm so sorry that your granddaughter had to endure that, and I'm so happy she is safe.
And you will note, please, that Joe Biden tried during his presidency to do something about these shootings. Please note that Donald Trump has taken the line of the National Rifle Association, hook, line, and sinker. And it's very, very disturbing.
Even a fractured NRA, even an NRA coming out of bankruptcy that doesn't wield the power with report cards in Congress that they once did. It's just it's a shame that nothing has happened. I go back to Newtown, and I was in a newsroom that day when it happened, and we all thought, all right, well, this is the one. This is the one that's going to change everything, because how small and precious and how tragic it was. Small and precious those kids were, and how tragic it was. And even Sandy Hook Promise exists as a charity today, and they haven't been able to get
Let
very
me
far.
remind you, the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy shook the nation to our foundations. Lyndon Johnson delivered a speech to the American people, a man from Texas, a man who used a gun regularly, going hunting, appealing for the question of limitation on guns. And if you, I know that you can find the clip of what Johnson said. It is so important, and people don't remember. It is just, to me, incomprehensible. If I have to have a driver's license to drive a car, you ought to have a license to own a gun. And let me be clear, I understand that the automobile is not mentioned in the Constitution. And the argument is, but the guns are. And my answer is, you will see in this administration, Donald Trump has made certain promises to the American people relative to crime. But if what he did with these pardons is any indication, his disrespect for the men and women in blue, his lack of respect for law enforcement, the idea that someone could attack a police officer and be given a presidential pardon, a complete pardon, meaning even if you're convicted of a crime, you can, once you have that pardon, you can go out and get a gun. That should shake us to our very foundations.
No, it's an extraordinary thing when you think about it. I mean, it's beyond anything I could.
What do you do, Michael, when you have extraordinary thing after extraordinary thing happening every day? And how do you focus on it? And how do we?
Yeah, you run against it, you report it, you hope that it matters, and you try and keep finding ways for it to matter, because we've entered an era where nothing does, it seems, or very little does, and there's a receptive audience, and there are so many different layers to it. The cult of personality that he has created, it's all very, very complicated. And so I don't know the answer to that question, but there are a lot of us that are trying to think of what it might be.
Well, one thing I can promise you, I intend to raise my voice, whether it's here, in other forums. I'll be speaking this afternoon at a forum here in San Francisco. I intend to continue to voice my concerns. I don't know whether it'll make a difference, but I can tell you that I refuse to accept the idea that I'm impotent, that I'm unable to affect what happens. And I hope that's the way all of our listeners and those in the media who have the courage to speak out will. That's what we have to do. And we have a congressional election coming up in less than 2 years, and that's going to be critical as well.
And so on that, I want to ask a couple of things before we let you go, because there is a congressional election. There's a lot that can be done, probably not in the next couple of days, but because it's a lot of reaction right now. A couple of our listeners and viewers wanted to ask you, we talked about this at length yesterday, about Elon Musk's seeming salute that we saw the other day. Are you familiar with that? And
I watched it, and I watched his commentary afterward, and I watched a collage of images of what he has done in other circumstances. I consider Elon Musk to be a genius. He is a man of remarkable foresight. But I would remind you, so was Henry Ford, a man of remarkable foresight. Henry Ford was a vicious anti-Semite. It did not diminish his genius, but you have to take genius with a grain of salt. Elon Musk has done amazing, amazing things, but to put a man who is unelected and who is now back the furthest right party in Germany scares the living bejeebers out of me. And you're playing now what he did. It's just very upsetting. And by the way, you'll notice he's standing at a podium with the symbol of the President of the United States of America.
Right.
And he shouldn't have. Billionaires have a voice. They've made money. They can make political contributions. But did Elon Musk give a Nazi salute? I don't think so. I like to think he knows better. I think what Elon Musk did in a moment of enthusiasm was to stretch out his arm, put it on his heart, and he explained it that way. But
I believe that too. I mean, there were a lot of the viewers yesterday were saying I'm wrong, that it was clearly that's what it
no,
was.
he's not a Nazi. But I want to point out he is supporting a far right political party in Germany, the
Well, but then I would
second
argue,
largest party in Germany.
then I would argue, John, isn't there something Nazistic about that? I mean, I also agree and didn't think it was a Nazi salute, but you can't say that he's not that. I just don't think he did that. If
He
he's
is not. Look,
supporting
he's not a
our,
Nazi, and I take that into account.
yeah,
But he is a man who has endorsed and made statements which I profoundly disagree with, and which I think we all need to be very, very careful about. Nobody who's unelected should have that kind of influence with the president of the United States. The fact that he had billionaires sitting at his inauguration placed ahead of members of Congress and his own cabinet should be very disturbing. You know, I always remember, I love presidential history. What was Thomas Jefferson's inauguration? Very different. But what was Andrew Jackson's inauguration? It was a people's party. Everybody was invited for Jackson's inaugural ceremony, and people got into the White House and messed it up. But the idea was the White House is the people's house, as is the Congress. It's who we are.
well, yeah.
By the way, I see that Anoe Marie, who I adored and who worked with us at KGO, is saying it was a Nazi salute and he did it multiple times. He does a lot of things multiple times. I don't know. I don't think anybody in his right mind would stand at that podium and give a Nazi salute. And he did say, it was just exuberant, this is a man who is dangerous, but let's label him for what he is in terms of what he really is. Whether he raises an arm or not, we've got other concerns, as we're seeing now with the whole question of investment and what he is doing there. And the suggestion by the president that he buy TikTok. I mean, let's stop and think here for a minute what the implications are. But I love all of the reaction. So,
yeah,
anyway.
there was a lot. Kurt says Elon is the son of two apartheid parents. He knows that arm movement means. And to that point, and to his influence, CNN said this shortly after President Donald Trump announced a new massive AI infrastructure investment from the White House. Fist buddy Elon Musk tried to tear it down. They don't actually have the money. Musk wrote on his social media platform X. SoftBank has well under 10 billion secured. I have that on good authority. Trump said the investment will create a new company called Stargate to grow artificial intelligence infrastructure in the U.S. The leaders of SoftBank, OpenAI, and Oracle say, well, I don't have all of it, but yeah,
no, you've gotten the general drift. And the most important single thing is that's not the job of a president of the United States.
Right.
The president of the United States has defined functions, and I hope he sticks to them, even though I disagree with him on almost everything he's doing.
Yeah, and that he's going to have an office across the street from the White House in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building is unprecedented is a word that we're going to say so much that it's going to lose its meaning, but I can't think of anything.
If Dwight Eisenhower were alive today, he'd be rolling over in his grave.
Right. That's well, if he were alive, he wouldn't be in a grave. So there's that. But yes, if he knew, if he could tell him, he would certainly roll over in it. But yeah, it's and then SoftBank, the American Day says SoftBank executive found dead in London the night before. Yeah, I don't know all the details of that, so I can't.
I don't want to link into conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
All you have to do is look and listen to what Donald Trump is doing on a daily basis. That in and of itself should raise concerns by all of us. By the way, just so we're clear, I'm not dismissing some of these things. But if we don't keep our eye on the ball, if we don't really analyze what Donald Trump is doing, the idea that he is saying ICE agents can go into schools and churches, who are in schools? Kids. And if you're a parent and you're here illegally, are you going to send your kid to school out of fear that, well, something might happen? And, you know, the ramifications here are really incredible. So we better stop and think carefully about what's happening.
Yeah, indeed. Brian Reich sends in $18, supporting the Mark Thompson Show. Thankful for John, his time, thoughts, input, sincerity, and wisdom. 18 equals life. That is the Jewish 18. L'chaim. Yeah. So there you have it. Some support. Luis also giving $4.99 earlier for the last time. There is no global warming. The evil space laser used against Florida. Damn you, Dems. He's saying that.
Can I just say, I'm waiting for when Tulsi Gabbard comes up for her hearing, and she will speak about Jewish space lasers again, which she said caused forest fires here in California last year, and they're thinking about confirming her. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, no question. John Rothman, thank you for your time. Tell me again where people can read and hear what you have to say.
I do 2 podcasts. They are no more than 10 minutes each day. One is Around the Political World with John Rothman. There's no charge for that. And the other is The Voice of San Francisco. When you hit that, you go to podcasts. I do a daily recording for them. And it's my thoughts and feelings and concerns. And I want to, again, urge everybody support the Mark Thompson program. And we have to keep talking to each other and talking to the world. And this is a great vehicle to do it. And Michael, thank you for allowing me to be with you today.
No, happy to have you here. Pointing out, too, that it was Marjorie Taylor Greene, as our listeners and viewers have said.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, yes. But Tulsi Gabbard endorses that kind of stuff. Right. And it's just but thank you for the correction. I have to tell you,
that was our astute listenership that was pointing that out.
May I say to our astute listenership, 3 cheers for you.
All right. Take care, John. Thanks so much.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.